It's just another Meta Monday. Oh, oh, it's a data is fun day. Welcome back to Meta Monday. Better late than never, huh? I didn't have things put together for this morning, but I took some time to put it together looking at some of the events in MTG Melee that we had over the weekend. And we actually have a good chunk of data to dig into here. So, in addition to the Hoaglandia Open this past weekend, we had the CFB Pro Showdown, as well as two Insight Esports events, and then two other slightly smaller tournaments run by independent tournament organizers on MTG Melee that gave us almost 1,200 matches to look at with a total of 379 deck lists overall. At a glance, the first thing that pops out is it looks like the expected decks going into this weekend were the most popular that we could have easily predicted here, with both Is It Phoenix and Jeskai Control putting up just over 11% of the field for each of those. But overall, the field is incredibly diverse still. Past those two at 11% each. If we look at the top 50% of the field, this is 22, 30, 42. We've got 6 different decks that make up the top 50% of the field. The other category, decks that had fewer than 10 copies played, was 35% of the field overall. That being said, even though the format is fairly diverse, the popular decks in the format do look like they're still doing very well. Something that I talked about last week was Is It Phoenix kind of had its breakout performance that weekend with a very strong win rate in the events that it was played in. And we see that repeating here again this week for the second week in a row, putting up an over 61% win rate across these selection of events. Jeskai Control coming in a little bit underneath that, but still an incredibly strong finish at 58%. This is a trend I'm going to want to track and look at as the format matures more. There's definitely something to be said, this format was new with HA5 cards being introduced. That being said, as Historic grows and matures as a format more, new card releases will have slightly smaller impacts as we go on, and that's a good thing. A non-rotating format should be fairly stable overall. You don't want a format being turned on its head with every card release, because you want people to be able to have decks that they like playing and have them be able to know that those decks are going to be good for an extended period of time. So a metric that we've talked about in the past is about a 56% win rate is when you start to think, okay, maybe this is a little bit too good. And if you see decks sustain that 56+% win rate over larger sample sizes, that in my mind is the metric that, hey, maybe something should probably change about one of these decks. So this is the second week in a row that we're seeing Is It Phoenix put up strong numbers. I believe Jeskai Control is stronger than even what we had last week here, coming in at 58%. Gruul putting up a pretty fine performance. My experience with the format is that while Gruul definitely has its nut draws with Burning Tree Emissary and Embercleave, overall, the format definitely has good tools to fight it, especially with the addition of Lightning Helix to the format. I think Gruul's in a pretty reasonable spot in terms of power level. One of the first decks that really jumps out to me as having a really strong performance this weekend is Jun Food. While Jun Food is obviously not a new deck to the format, and it didn't explicitly gain cards with HA5, the fact that Jeskai Control is one of the more popular decks means that Jun Food, being this kind of grindy creature-based deck, has room to breathe in the format a little bit more. We saw Jun Food kind of get pushed back by things like Tainted Pack and Velocamist turns right after Strixhaven released, and as Jeskai Control has kind of put a little bit of a stranglehold on those spell-based combo decks, it gives something like Jun Food room to kind of push back up into the format and grind against things like Jeskai and punish small creature decks. So if I was looking at historic events going into this coming weekend, I would want to make sure I have a plan for Jun Food, because I would expect that deck, based on its performance, to grow in popularity. Another one of the big winners from this weekend, having a bit smaller metagame share than something like Jund, is Mono Black Aggro. Mono Black Aggro had a very strong event, winning the entirety of our Hoaglandia. open. And this is one of the decks that I've had in the high potential section of my website because my experience playing with and against it on the ladder, anecdotally, has been that this deck feels like it really has the tools to be competitive in the format. Specifically, again, pointing back to Jeskai control as being a defining feature of the format. Mono black aggro compared to other things like, say, Gruul really feels like it has the ability to go toe to toe against control much better than the other aggressive options in the format. Mono black on the back of its discard spells with Thoughtseize and Inquisition, as well as its recursive threats with things like Gutter Bones and Skyclave Shade, really lets you go long in the control matchup. Another thing that's really key to point out for mono black aggro is Spawn of Mayhem as one of their headlining threats, which dodges the addition of Lightning Helix to the format, one of the key ways that Jeskai control is keeping things in check. Something that we see here that doesn't surprise me is Celesia Company is an archetype that struggled a bit this week, and I think the struggle on Celesia Company's part can likely be attributed to Jun Food having its strong win rate. Honestly, I think Jun Food being pushed out of the format a bit by Strixhaven was one of the better things that has happened to Historic since I've been playing the format, because Jun Food really preys on these fair, honest creature decks like Celesia Company. Claim the Firstborn, Corvald especially. We see Skyclave Apparition being a headlining way to remove things, and Corvald's a 5-mana threat that deck can ramp into with things like Gilded Goose, that if it sits on the board for a turn, it just completely dominates. Usually draws half a dozen cards and grows up to double digits in attack and defense really quickly to end the game. So it doesn't surprise me that the combination of both Corvald and Claim the Firstborn from Jun Food probably gave Celesia a little bit of a rough time this week. One thing that I will say anecdotally that did surprise me is that Jeskai Turns, this is the Velomachus Indomitable Creativity deck, had kind of a mediocre weekend overall. I think this deck is probably, in my experience, this deck is better than its win rate here gives it credit for. And again, we're working with smaller sample sizes in these decks down here that, have fewer than 20 copies played. So you got a grain of salt our confidence interval on how sure we are that this number is accurate over a larger sample size is small. But I think this would be a deck that I would want to watch for as well. This is one of those decks that I kind of talked about earlier in terms of Jun Food. If Jun Food is an archetype that we expect to get more popular as these non-rotating formats get cyclical, Jeskai Turns could be something that you would want to look to be able to attack the Jun Food deck reasonably, because it is a faster combo deck that things like Jun Food, generally speaking, have a hard time keeping up with. Rogues really look like it got pushed around in this first weekend. Again, smaller sample size, but the addition of Relic of Progenitus to the format definitely did not do Rogues any favors. Being able to exile your own graveyard while cantripping is huge. Being able to just activate Relic every turn targeting yourself, making sure that the Rogues graveyard payoffs is something that's pretty real. On the flip side of that too, Rakdos Arcanist had a pretty okay weekend. 55% on a smaller sample size is like not anything super impressive, but at the same time, this deck doesn't look like it was held back by the addition of a new piece of graveyard hate to the format. I guess I have to mention it because Grixis Control, good at Grixis Control, being the sixth most played deck, and I think this metric is definitely skewed a little bit by the fact that the Hooglandia Open was one of our tournaments being played. People that play in that event are almost assuredly biased towards decks that I like, and I like Grixis Control chat. I'm a member of Twitch chat on occasion, so I like Grixis Control, but Grixis Control doing Grixis Control things here and putting up a little bit less than 40% win rate here. The other category, pretty reasonable, all things considered. I know it's a little bit less than 50%, but the metric that I look at for like what's a reasonable win rate, usually between 45 and 55%, that's within 10% of what we would consider to be the average Five within that 5% plus or minus 5% of the average of a 50% win rate of an ideally balanced situation. So overall, it definitely feels like there's room to maneuver in the format still. People are bringing lots of different decks. Over a third of the format was people that registered less than 10 copies out of this sample, and they still won quite a bit of matches. They won more than Grixis Control. All right. At any rate, this has been my rambly offline direct to YouTube Meta Monday. Let me know in the comments down below, why do you think we saw the metrics we saw this week? What decks do you think are going to be the decks to beat going into this weekend? Do you think, is it Phoenix and Jeskai Control are too strong? Do you think they're about right? Are you happy with where the format's at? Are you unhappy? What are you feeling? Hit me up. Let me know. I'll be back with more live content tomorrow morning, as always. Thanks for watching, folks, and see you on stream real soon, hopefully.